So the Texas doubleheader is probably an experiment better left off in 2011, but we tried it again in 2021, and a lot of predictable shenanigans went on with PJ1. Unfortunately, an unpredictable huge crash at the start of race 2, but thankfully some positive unpredictability. A brand new winner, and another driver approaching a major IndyCar milestone. Let's talk about a doubleheader at Texas Motor Speedway. And welcome back. So I want to get the ranty part of the video out of the way so we can talk racing and analysis for the rest of it. But I have a few things to say about this to begin with. Number one, I'm not a fan of doubleheaders just on principle. I think that I would prefer, if you're going to have 17 events, to have those on 17 different tracks. I think that the doubleheaders only lead to a shorter season and a less diverse season, and both of those things I think hurt the sport in the long run. It might be a short-term gain thing, but I think it's a long-term loss thing. And especially you shouldn't have doubleheaders at racetracks that don't put on a very good show. And at least for the very first race, it would be arguable on the second one, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in this video. PJ1 Texas, or PJ1 Stain, Texas, is not a track worthy of hosting two races in a calendar year, and particularly two races back-to-back. It's unfortunate because, I think a lot of people, myself included, remember it wasn't all that long ago. I looked back on the 2019 race, and I thought that was a pretty solid race. That Texas was a racetrack that you kind of circled on the calendar and said, all right, this is going to be one hell of a show. Sometimes scary things happen, but of course, a scary thing happened today before they even got to the green flag. So, what's going on right now is you've got a one-groove racetrack in the corners, and we know the limitations with IndyCar's current aerodynamic package. We've talked about it several times on here. We've talked about it with the drivers themselves. Colton Herta is one that comes to mind. Even at a track like Indianapolis, where IndyCars naturally just race better anyway, you still have factors with turbulence that are very difficult to overcome. And I remember them mentioning it on the broadcast today that the more downforce that you put into a car, because of course Texas is a shorter track, you need a little bit more downforce. You naturally get more turbulence or turbulent air coming off of the cars ahead, so it makes it more difficult to follow closely. So when you've got that one groove racetrack and you can't follow closely, it's very difficult with the short straightaways at Texas because of the nature of the track to, even if you get an amazing run off of the corner and have enough clean air on the straightaway to try to make a pass, you're going to be making that move very late. And that's what we saw. And that's what we saw today. Pato O'Ward excel at, was being able to time those passes before you had to get to the one groove lane brought on by the PJ1 in both 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Graham Rahal talked today in the post-race press conference, and I thought it was a very interesting statement. A lot of the drivers got a lot of questions about the PJ1 and the grip level. And Graham actually had a stat that I found incredibly interesting, which was Firestone apparently measured that the PJ1 stained sections of the track, and when I say PJ1 stained, there's still a residue there. It's apparently like stepping on ice if you're walking on it. And so just imagine what it's like for a race car. Firestone determined that it was around a loss of 20 to 25% of overall grip from the Indy cars when they get onto that slick part of the racetrack. So something has to change. Graham mentioned the fact that the PJ1 would eventually fade away and the track would be much better, but that's something that would take a lot of time and a lot of cars running on it and not having that PJ1 reapplied. Unfortunately, Eddie Gossage has got the NASCAR All-Star race, the most gimmicked up race in existence, and that's saying something on that calendar. And I could only imagine that you're going to get a nice thick coating of PJ1 around the outside of that racetrack to try to manufacture a second groove for NASCAR Cup. So at the very least, I think, unless Texas goes out there this winter and repaves 1 and 2 just to get the surface grip levels evened up again, I don't think it's worth running Texas twice. Now, I don't know what kind of a contract Eddie has with IndyCar. I know that there were some provisions made. I mean, the reason that this happened in the first place is that Gossage wanted Circuit of the Americas off the schedule, and in exchange for that, he did the first race of the season last year with no fans. That was something that Roger Penske had to negotiate with Gossage and Texas Motor Speedway. And I think he also negotiated the favorable date and doubleheader for this year in exchange for getting the IndyCar opener in Texas last year. So, I mean, it's disappointing. And I would just say I hope they don't run 2 races there next year. I hope they find a suitable other track to go to next year. I'm not saying I think they should drop Texas entirely, and I hope they don't. I think Texas is still a track that Indy cars can race very well on, but unfortunately, yes, there are some IndyCar aero issues. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, it's very clear that Texas has to take the effort as well to try to get this track in shape for 220 mile an hour open wheel cars to race around it competitively. And I said this on Twitter. I mean, what is the point of having a banked track if you cannot run 2 grooves? The whole point of having that banking is to help the cars get side by side, try to produce that side by side racing. And if you don't have that bank, if you're not able to take advantage of the banking, why do you have the banking in the first place? It would be better if you just flattened it, and it would probably produce better racing, at least for the open wheel cars. So we did have 2 races this weekend. Let's start talking about them. The first race was definitely the stinker of the 2. Scott Dixon was pretty much wholly dominant. It was very similar in some ways to St. Petersburg with Colton Herta. That happens sometimes in IndyCar racing where you just have somebody just so dominant that they just smack the field down, and it happens sometimes. The problem was, of course, that there really wasn't any opportunity to pass. You really didn't have the track get rubbered in. Part of that was due to the fact that they ran 1 practice session. They weren't able to run any qualifying sessions or anything throughout the whole weekend. Again, that's part of the truncated weekend and the fact that they had a little bit of weather concerns, which threw everything off, which again kind of goes back to me advocating for 3-day weekends and not running double headers, because you have more opportunity to get that one race right rather than having to rush through the program either on a 2-day schedule or a double header where you have to, be so dependent on TV times to get things in. Scott Mclaughlin was second, and I don't want to take anything away from Scott Dixon because I do want to kind of circle back to Scott Dixon and talk about him, but I do want to talk about Mclaughlin because in his first oval race ever, yes, he had some strategy help. Yes, his Team Penske crew is extremely good, but I think it's also worth mentioning that this was the track that he had the most experience on, believe it or not. He's run, I think, 3 tests here prior, and you've come back here now in race conditions, and Scott Mclaughlin looked like a veteran. You heard pretty much everybody talking about that. So it makes me think, kind of as we are now in the month of May, looking ahead to a week of practice and then a couple of extra days of practice leading up to the Indianapolis 500. Again, assuming McLaughlin qualifies, I think we're expecting about 36 cars to show up. So there's a potential that he could get bumped, but I don't think it's very likely. I would say that Scott Mclaughlin is going to be a guy who I think is going to be a challenger at the Indianapolis 500. I mean, there's a reason the guy got compared to Rick Mears by his boss, Roger Penske. I never heard Roger Penske make that kind of comparison ever before, and that's what made me kind of take note of Scott Mclaughlin. Scott Dixon, by the way, is now only 1 win away from Mario Andretti, and very well could get that within this month. I think he's got a great chance at both the Indianapolis 500 and the Indy GP, which he is now a winner of as well. Race 2, we obviously know about the big crash. I don't have to go into too much detail about it. Glad everybody's okay. I mean, it was a fairly slow-speed accident in the first place, so even though the spectacularness of Connor Daly getting upside down, it wasn't one that really concerned me. We've seen a lot worse wrecks at Texas than that one. But the thing about this race was Pato O'Ward. I mean, the fact that I had just been talking about the second groove, the PJ1 groove, the groove that you didn't want to be in. Pato was able to make that work, go around the outside, at times was completely sideways. And I really do think, finally, the pieces all came together. McLaren actually made a strategy call that, they've made a lot of bad strategy calls recently. They started him on black tires at St. Petersburg. Or they qualified him on black tires at St. Petersburg. That wasn't a great decision. They pitted him way too early at Barber. Then you go back to last year, and I can think of like Iowa and a few other races where they made mistakes with Pato when it looked like he was in a surefire opportunity to win. This one, they brought him in a lap later than Graham Rahal and Scott Dixon. That got him out in front of at least those two dominant drivers on the day. But then he had to go up there and earn it. He had to go up there and pass Joseph Newgarden legitimately on a track in which it was so very difficult to pass. He was able to do that. He was able to win. And what a win it is. What a way to get his first win. And this is the first of many. I've kind of had Pato kind of pegged going into the season as one of, if not the guy I'm looking at as a potential champion going into this year. And as long as he can stay consistent, as long as he can stay out of trouble, because I think another driver you look at who's kind of in the same boat as Pato is a Colton Herta. But Herta's had a lot of things go wrong, and it hasn't even been his fault. He got taken out in Joseph Newgarden's accident at Barber, had a wheel bearing failure in the first race at Texas. So Pato, if he can just keep the wheels on the road and stay out of other people's trouble, I think he's going to be right there by the time we get to Long Beach, especially considering Indianapolis 500, that's a double points race. Pato was very strong there last year, 5th place and Rookie of the Year honors. Speaking of strong, I think if you're looking from the Honda contingent at least, Graham Rahal, he was the fastest no-tow car in the test there in April, and he was very fast last year, defending winners of that race. It looks like their oval program is very fast. And then, of course, Scott Dixon, Chip Ganassi Racing, Michael Kanaan, all those good things. Those two impressed me quite a bit today, and I think they're kind of the leading Honda candidates going into the month of May. I think there's a lot more. Well, I don't know if there's a lot more Chevy candidates, but I think if you look at how strong Arrow McLaren SP is, the first Chevy winners, I think I saw Jennifer Fryer say this, first Chevy winners in IndyCar that are non-Penske since 2016. So I think that's fairly significant and actually a stat that kind of blew my mind. But obviously, yeah, it's the month of May. So kind of moving away from Texas, that was kind of a weird open to the month of May. But a few things we can take away from Texas, I think. Number one, going into the 500, it looks like the Chevys have the fuel mileage, which is a complete inverse over what we'd seen 2 years ago in 2019, where the Hondas had the fuel mileage, and that was what allowed Alexander Rossi to really challenge Simon Pagenaud at the end of that particular race. But of course, by the time we got to 2020, things seemed to be flipping, at least in the horsepower department, where Honda was dominant the entire month of August last year. So now we get back to 2021, and this race was really won by the Chevy fuel mileage. So makes me kind of think going into Indianapolis, I think you're going to see the Honda cars be very quick, particularly in qualifying. It's going to be up to the Chevys to perhaps move up and through the field and be in contention at the end of the race. Obviously, that's when the pay window opens, of course. But that's something we'll, of course, be tracking throughout the practice days to kind of see where the speeds are falling. The Andretti Autosport cars may have a bit of a chink in their armor going to Indianapolis. There were 2 wheel bearing failures on cars with Andretti parts on them. You had Colton Herta in race 1, and you had Jack Harvey in race 2. Now, Andretti Autosport and Andretti Technologies, which builds some of these parts for the cars, they account for 8 entries going into this year's Indianapolis 500. So if there is a wheel bearing issue across the team that may or may not be resolved by the Indianapolis 500, that's 8 cars that could have mechanical failures before the end of the race. Again, that's going to be something we're going to have to look for in practice at the Indianapolis 500 to see if that rears its ugly head. Something else that looks a little bid ugly right now are the Dale Coyne racing cars. They were the slowest cars in the no-tow times in the Indianapolis 500 practice in April. And here at Texas, they looked fairly unspectacular. Both Ed Jones and Pietro Fittipaldi didn't exactly look like they had the fastest cars in race trim. Qualifying trim, we really don't know because they didn't qualify here at Texas. But going forward to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, I'm kind of looking at the Coyne cars as potentially those cars playing a factor in bump day. And some cars that I don't think will be playing a factor in bump day, but some guys I think will be playing very much a factor in the deciding moments of the race when we get to the Indianapolis 500 are kind of the silver foxes. Tony Kanaan, Juan Pablo Montoya, and Helio Castroneves. I think they're all going to be major factors. Tony Kanaan looks extremely motivated driving for Chip Ganassi Racing. The lack of qualifying was the only thing that kept him out of any kind of contention for the winner's circle this weekend. He won't have that problem into the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He's got an amazing opportunity to come back to Chip Ganassi Racing just as they are getting very well engineered. You saw how fast Dixon was last year. I expect Tony Kanaan's going to be right up there as well. Juan Pablo Montoya, well, guess which team just won an oval race? That would be Aero McLaren SP. Juan Pablo Montoya hasn't run the Indianapolis 500 for the last few years and tends to win as soon as he gets to a new team when he arrives at the Indianapolis 500. He scored in his first win for Chip Ganassi, and he scored in his second race for Team Penske. If the pattern continues, what does that mean for Aero McLaren SP? And Helio Castroneves, Jack Harvey proved this weekend that while they might be a little bit unreliable, the Meyer Shank Racing Andretti supplied cars are extremely potent. And he's only going to help Jack Harvey get up to speed. I look at that 1-2 punch of Harvey and Castroneves as a potential dark horse duo going into the Indianapolis 500. So, here we go. We're about to start camping out in the Mobile Command Center, soon to be not so Mobile Command Center at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I cannot wait. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be a return to normal. I'm ecstatic. I can't wait to share my coverage of that event with you guys on this channel in the coming months, or the coming weeks. It's going to feel like months, but it's going to be exciting. It's going to be long in an exciting way and not in an unexciting way. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and I'll see you in the next video.